Hello, hello. Just came back from ElixirConf last week, and one of the highlights was Elixir may be getting a type system. There was one really interesting thing that Jose shared, which I thought was kind of confusing at first, which is an intersection type, but it has a very specific application in Elixir. So we have this example here of a negate function. And by the way, I'm pulling this example directly from the paper. If you want to look at the paper, you can go and find that online. But we have this negate function. When it's an integer, it does negative x. And when it's a Boolean, it says not x, right? So pretty straightforward. How would we type this in Elixir? So the way that type signatures will work is you have a $, and then we have the arguments here. This is the arrow and then the return value, right? So what we're saying here is that this could take an integer or a Boolean, and then it returns either an integer or a Boolean, right? The problem with this type is that it actually has too many possible cases that are not true. For example, if you look at this, this is saying that if we take an integer, it could return an integer. That's true. It also says that if we take an integer, it could return a Boolean. That's actually false. If you look at this, none of those actually take an integer and return a Boolean, right? So, and the same with this one. A Boolean to an integer is not a valid case. Boolean to Boolean is, but Boolean to integer isn't. And so we're actually specifying something that is not correct. It has too many potential values that are not correct. So another way to do this is to type it like this. We have an integer to integer or a Boolean to Boolean, right? Sort of like a union right here. This is slightly better, but the problem with this is still that it's not specific enough. So if you take a look at this, the problem is that what happens if you delete one of these functions? Someone comes in and deletes one of these. Well, this is technically still correct because this is still returning integer to integer or Boolean to Boolean. If you think of this in set theory or as sets, the union of the integer to integer functions and Boolean to Boolean functions still includes this function because it's the union, so it's encompassing both sets. So that's not exactly what we want. Okay, so that's why we have an intersection type. And this is the part that I thought was a little confusing because we use an intersection here as instead of a union. So we have integer to integer and Boolean to Boolean. You might say that's weird because there's no intersection of integer to integer functions and to Boolean functions. Those are kind of separate. But in Elixir, there is, because you can have a function that is the intersection of those two, where you have functions that are integer to integer and Boolean to Boolean. You can even think of it as a set of all functions that return integer to integer and Boolean to Boolean. And that's because we can do multiple function heads based on these things. Now, the nice thing, if I didn't misunderstand this with Jose's talk, is that you can actually write this like this. So this looks a lot more like what you would have for each function head, except it's all at the top. I thought it was pretty cool, and I hope you like it.